Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Humanity has always had this profound, agonizing struggle to define the darkness in the world. I mean, are we caught in the crossfire of a literal cosmic war against a supernatural enemy of the creator? Or is the ultimate villain just a psychological mirror, reflecting the darkest, most unfettered parts of our own human nature?
That tension right there. The monster under the bed versus the monster in the mirror. I mean, that's the oldest debate in human history, really. Every
Wow.
culture constructs a villain.
Right, and examining those villains reveals pretty much everything about what that culture values and obviously what it fears.
Exactly. You can't separate the two.
So we are jumping into a massive deep dive today to trace the evolution of that ultimate villain. We've got a really fascinating stack of source material for you, transcripts from two incredible videos that break down global concepts of the devil alongside these wild historical and supernatural claims of demonic presence.
A lot of ground to cover.
It really is. Our mission today is to dissect how different religions actually define God by how they define evil. We're going to heavily explore the philosophical battleground of theology versus atheism, looking at how secular thinkers eventually hijack the devil to represent human freedom and rebellion. And hey, if you like my channel, please subscribe and hit the like button.
Because when you look at these texts, you realize you just can't separate the concept of the devil from humanity's attempt to understand God's ultimate authority.
Right.
How a faith views its creator completely dictates how it views evil.
That theological blueprint, that's exactly where we have to start. The sources show us the ancient world had wildly different approaches to this. Take Zoroastrianism, for example.
Oh yeah, the ultimate cosmic dualist.
Right. You have Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of good, locked in this eternal struggle with Angramanyu, the evil spirit. They are essentially two distinct warring factions.
And dualism provides a really clean psychological answer to the problem of suffering for people. In that framework, good and evil are in a genuine boxing match.
Neither is totally all-powerful.
Exactly. At this current moment in time, neither has won, even if the belief is that good will eventually triumph. So when crops fail or disease strikes, the believer doesn't have to agonize over why a loving God would do such a thing. They can just point to Angramanyu.
Makes total sense. That framework heavily influenced later religions. But the Abrahamic faiths took the concept of the devil and just shifted his job description entirely.
They really did.
I mean, Judaism contrasts so sharply with that dualist idea. Historically, in the Hebrew Bible, there is no supernatural devil opposing God with his own evil army. The word Satan appears rarely, like in the book of Job, and he is absolutely not a rival god. He's more like a divine agent.
Right, he's part of the system.
Yeah, think about it like a courtroom or a corporation for a second. If the Zoroastrian devil is a rival CEO actively trying to bankrupt God's company and steal the market share, the Jewish concept of Satan is just the harsh, cross-examining prosecutor who actually works for the exact same judge.
That's a great way to put it.
His job is merely to test the witnesses on the stand.
And that dynamic is so important because it protects the absolute sovereignty of God. Judaism avoids dualism because suggesting God has a true rival diminishes God's supreme power.
Right. It implies God isn't totally in control.
Exactly. And we see a variation of this intricate balance in Islam, too. Islamic theology introduces Iblis, right? A jinn made of smokeless fire.
Who refused to bow to Adam.
Out of pure pride. But the crucial mechanism here is that evil is created by God as a deliberate test of faith.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, Iblis is not rebelling against God's ultimate cosmic power. He knows he can't win a war against the Creator. He's rebelling against humans. He acts merely as a tempter, just whispering distractions to see who's going to stray.
But then Christianity takes that tempter and amps up the cosmic rivalry again. The devil becomes Lucifer, a fallen angel who rebelled because he wanted to actually be God's equal.
Right, the ambition is different there.
He's cast out and now rules over corrupt earthly systems. The texts describe him as the prince of the power of the air, actively working to corrupt humanity just to spite God.
Which creates one of the most complex theological puzzles in human history, honestly. Theodicy.
The vindication of God's goodness in the face of absolute evil.
Yes. Because if you have a religion where God is absolutely, infinitely all-powerful and all-knowing, how can evil exist at all? Did God create the evil? Does God simply allow it to happen? The way a culture answers that specific question completely shapes their monster. Is the monster a rebel, a tester, or a cosmic equal?
And that exact theological puzzle, how an all-powerful God allows evil, is the wedge that modern secular thinkers use to just remove God from the equation entirely.
It's a huge shift.
It is. And you would think that if an atheist looks at the universe, removes the creator, and strips away the supernatural, the devil would just disappear in a puff of smoke. No God, no Satan.
But he doesn't.
No, the concept doesn't vanish at all. It transforms into this massive philosophical weapon.
It morphs from a literal supernatural entity into a construct of defiance. In atheistic and existential views, evil is absolutely not a cosmic force pulling strings behind the scenes.
What is it then?
It's a human-made construct, born entirely from our own choices, our actions, and our societal structures.
The sources bring up Friedrich Nietzsche to illustrate this, which is super interesting. He famously proclaimed, "God is dead." And obviously, he wasn't talking about a literal assassination in the clouds.
Yo.
He meant that traditional religious moral frameworks had lost their cultural authority to govern human behavior. And in that vacuum, Satan becomes an archetype. He becomes a symbol of ultimate self-determination and rebellion against the herd mentality of organized religion.
Because Nietzsche's philosophy strips away that divine safety net. Then you have Albert Camus, the existentialist philosopher, who takes it even a step further.
Right, the absurdity of life.
Exactly. Camus viewed life as inherently absurd. We're humans desperately demanding meaning from a universe that is completely silent and indifferent. To Camus, Satan is the ultimate metaphor for human defiance. He represents the chaos we struggle against, but also the fierce independence of trying to forge our own purpose without God's just handing it down to us from a mountain.
Which directly births modern atheistic Satanism. Groups like LaVeyan Satanists or the Satanic Temple, they do not believe in a literal supernatural devil.
Right. There are no sacrifice altars in the basement.
Yeah, exactly. They use Satan strictly as a symbol for human nature, free thought, pride, and activist defiance.
And the mechanism of how they use that symbol is what makes it so effective. They view Satan as the ultimate adversary to oppressive religious overreach. When they push for the separation of church and state or challenge religious monuments on public property, they use the imagery of the devil to force a conversation about pluralism and rationality.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, though. Why keep the villain at all? If you're a staunch atheist and you do not believe in heaven, hell, or angels, why dress up your modern philosophy in the imagery of the ultimate religious bad guy? Why not just call your group the Humanist Society of Free Thought and drop the pitchforks?
That's the core question, isn't it? Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, by adopting the devil as a mascot, you are deliberately taking the most terrifying symbol of the old paradigm and completely defanging it.
Ah, so it's taking the power back.
It's an act of reclaiming the narrative. In a secular worldview, utilizing Satan shifts the blame for the world's horrors away from the cosmos and places it squarely on human will. It's a provocative, highly visible way of saying that we are solely responsible for our own actions, our own justice, and our own morality. The shock value literally forces society to look in the mirror.
And that secular idea that the darkness is just a metaphor for human nature and human choices sounds incredibly modern and edgy, but it actually echoes ancient spiritual traditions.
Oh, heavily.
Long before Nietzsche or Camus, mystics were looking inward, deep into the mind, rather than up into the cosmos, to find the source of evil.
The internalization of the demon is a massive theme in Eastern traditions and mysticism. The battlefield is not in the sky, it's entirely internal. Like in Buddhism, there is no direct equivalent to a cosmic Satan, but there is Mara.
Mara, the celestial being of desire, darkness, and illusion. The sources note that Mara tried to stop the Buddha from achieving enlightenment by tempting him with his daughters, who represent lust and fear.
Right, and whether interpreted as a literal entity by some or a psychological metaphor by others, Mara's function is very clear. He's a barrier within the mind. He represents the hesitation, the ego, and the material distractions that keep a human being from achieving spiritual clarity. Mara tethering the Buddha to worldly desires is the mechanism of evil there.
We see that exact same inward mechanism in Sikhism. There is no devil to blame. Evil is represented by Maya and the five thieves: pride, lust, greed, attachment, and anger.
Internal forces.
Completely. They are psychological steerage, constantly pulling you away from spiritual growth. And the Baha'i and Sufi Islamic perspectives take this even further.
They really do.
The Baha'i faith sees Satan purely as a metaphor for the selfish, lower nature of humans. And Sufi philosophy states that the devil is quite literally the ego. They argue that saying the word I too much risks immense arrogance, which is a privilege that only God holds.
It's a profound shift in personal accountability. If the devil is your own ego, you can't blame an invisible horned demon for your misdeeds. You have to conquer yourself. The spiritual war is fought in your own habits and thoughts.
Think about the parallels here. Is the ancient Baha'i concept of the lower nature really that different from Albert Camus' modern secular view of human choices? Both philosophies, separated by centuries and fundamental beliefs about the divine, arrive at the exact same diagnosis. The darkness is inside us.
They are remarkably aligned in their understanding of human behavior. I mean, the ultimate goals differ. Spiritual enlightenment versus existential meaning. But the identification of the enemy is exactly the same.
Yeah.
And to understand the full spectrum of how humans internalize or externalize this enemy, we have to look at the Gnostic view. Gnosticism introduces a radical inversion of everything we've discussed.
The demiurge.
Yes. In Gnostic thought, the physical material world itself is inherently evil and full of suffering. Therefore, the being who created this physical world could not be the supreme good God. They believe the creator was a flawed, tyrannical entity called the demiurge.
And the sources highlight that some ancient Gnostic sects actually equated this demiurge with the Old Testament God, which is wild. Because they viewed the physical world as a flawed prison, they flipped the script on the Garden of Eden so drastically that they viewed the serpent as a hero.
Right, delivering the forbidden knowledge.
Exactly. To them, the serpent was freeing humanity from a false, oppressive creator. It's crazy to think about how early that rebellious archetype was formed.
It really showcases how flexible the concept of the devil is. But I will say, impartially synthesizing these views, whether it's the controversial Gnostic rejection of the material world, or the Buddhist conquering of Mara, or the Sufi suppression of the ego, the core theme remains focused on achieving liberation from the things that bind the human mind. Across all these traditions, the battlefield is inside.
That makes total sense intellectually. But, human beings are not just intellects. We are emotional, highly fearful creatures.
Absolutely.
While philosophers and mystics are busy internalizing evil and discussing the ego, everyday people have this deep-seated psychological need to externalize their fears. We want to point at a map and say, evil lives right there, or point at an event and say, that is the devil's work.
Because abstract concepts like the ego or Maya are incredibly difficult to fight. When a community faces unexplained illness, crop failure, or severe mental distress, they need their fears to be tangible. A physical location or a physical ritual provides a target.
The Valley of Hinnom is the perfect example of this. It sits just outside the ancient walls of Jerusalem. According to the historical text, this was a site where desperate people sacrificed their firstborn sons in fire to demonic entities, all just to ensure their crops would grow.
It's horrific.
It is. And the acts committed there were so deeply traumatizing to the cultural memory of the region that the Valley of Hinnom became the literal linguistic root for the Hebrew word for hell.
It reveals the terrifying mechanisms of human desperation. When survival is on the line, the fear of agricultural failure or supernatural punishment drives humans to project their existential dread onto a physical valley, committing unthinkable, tangible horrors just to appease the unknown.
And that deep need to see evil physically manifest brings us to exorcisms, which is not just ancient history, by the way. In 2013, Pope Francis was recorded laying hands on a man in St. Peter's Square in what was widely recognized as an exorcism. Exorcists operate today using holy objects like rosaries and crucifixes to drive out demons, and they claim to witness deeply supernatural events. The sources mention exorcists seeing 110-pound women throwing large men across rooms, and even victims levitating in midair.
The practice of exorcism really forces us to confront the intersection of faith, psychology, and physical reality.
So what does this all mean? I have to push back heavily on these claims. A 110-pound person throwing 3 full-grown men. Adrenaline and extreme psychological duress can do wild things to the human muscular system, but levitation, floating in midair, are these actual violations of the laws of science, or just extreme psychological hysteria and adrenaline?
Well, this raises an important question. From a purely empirical scientific standpoint, human levitation violates the laws of physics. The exorcists in the sources argue that spiritual entities possess the power to manipulate physical laws. However, the most revealing mechanism in the source material is the admission by the exorcists themselves about how they actually treat these individuals.
Oh, the 2-track.
Precisely.
Okay.
The exorcists explicitly state that they usually heal on 2 tracks simultaneously, the spiritual level and the psychological level.
Right.
They admit that many times the alleged demonic entity feeds directly off internal psychological wounds, deep anger, severe trauma, and unforgiveness. When they heal those inner psychological wounds, the demon loses its grip on the person.
That is incredibly telling. The priest is essentially using the intense ritual of the exorcism to externalize the trauma. By giving the trauma a name and calling it a demon, they help the person psychologically process their internal pain. It provides a tangible enemy to defeat, rather than asking someone in extreme distress to simply battle an abstract mental illness or invisible trauma.
It's a profound psychological release valve. The ritual bridges the gap between the mind and the material world, and we project these narratives onto landscapes as well, not just people. Consider Devil's Tower in Wyoming.
Right, a massive 900-foot rock shooting straight out of the flat sedimentary plains. The sources point out there is no surrounding volcanic activity to explain it easily.
It's totally out of nowhere.
Yeah, for Native Americans, it has always been a deeply sacred space, an altar for divine inspiration. But modern American culture looked at this imposing, unexplained geological anomaly and named it after the devil.
And Hollywood got a hold of it.
Exactly. Steven Spielberg, in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, turned it into a landing pad for UFOs.
It perfectly illustrates the human reflex. When we encounter a geological anomaly, something immense and mysterious that defies our immediate understanding, we project our grandest narratives onto it. Whether it's the divine, the demonic, or extraterrestrials, an unexplained landscape immediately becomes a canvas for our existential awe and our fears.
We simply cannot handle a mystery without putting a face on it. When the theology of God, the complex philosophy of atheism, and psychological explanations still leave you afraid of the dark woods at night, humanity takes one final step. We invent a physical monster.
Folklore and chimeras fill the void when logic and faith fail to comfort us. And few monsters are as bizarre or deeply rooted in local panic as the Jersey Devil.
So bring us into the Pine Barrens of southern New Jersey. It's 1 million acres of dense, dark woods, and lurking inside is this grotesque chimera. The sources describe it as having the head of a horse, horns, the body of a kangaroo, bat wings, and a forked tail.
It's such a specific visual.
Very. The origin story claims that in 1735, a woman named Mother Leeds cursed her 13th child upon birth, saying, "The devil can take this one." The baby allegedly transformed into this winged beast and flew up the chimney.
It functions as a classic cautionary tale. But the fascinating mechanism of the Jersey Devil is how a localized legend bled into genuine historical mass panic.
Right, like in the early 1800s, Stephen Decatur, a highly respected U.S. naval hero, claimed he saw it flying overhead and fired a cannonball right through its wing.
Wait, really? A cannonball?
A cannonball. And then during the week of January 16th, 1909, total mass hysteria broke out. Thousands of sightings were reported, local businesses and schools completely shut down, armed posses were hunting it, people genuinely believed a demon with bat wings was terrorizing trolley cars.
That's incredible. But underneath all that colonial and modern panic lies an even older root. Long before the colonists arrived, the Native American Lenape tribe referred to the Pine Barrens as the place of the dragon. The fear was already embedded in the geography long before Mother Leeds.
But I want you to ask yourself why. Why do human beings, even people in the 20th century who have complex philosophical concepts of atheism and God, who ride on trolley cars and read newspapers, why do they still shut down schools and run in absolute terror from a mythical creature with a horse face?
Because humanity requires an avatar for the unknown. To conclude this whole analytical journey, whether it's the cosmic evil of Angra Mainyu in ancient Persia, the absurd chaos of Albert Camus's existential dread, the internal ego of the Sufi mystics, or a winged beast screeching in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, we just need to give a face to the things we cannot control. An invisible fear is paralyzing. A psychological trauma is exhausting. But a monster you can theoretically shoot a cannonball at.
That is so true. Briefly recapping this massive journey for you. We've gone from God's cosmic rival to the prosecutor in the divine court, through the atheistic rebellion of Nietzsche and the Satanic Temple, into the psychological ego of the Buddhists, and finally to the physical fears of exorcisms and folklore.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. Which leaves me with a final lingering question for you to explore on your own. If humanity eventually colonizes other planets and leaves Earth behind, will we pack up our devils and bring them with us in our minds? Or will the vastness of space force us to invent entirely new concepts of evil?
That's a haunting thought.
Isn't it? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Keep questioning the dark.